So there's a new update for the TX-6, and I do believe that there's more than a year since the last update. And also a little over a year ago I made a video about my predictions for the future of the TX-6. While none of them came true, I am happy to see that Teenage Engineering did not completely forget about this device. So the new update is more than just a few bug fixes. They introduce a few brand new features. So in this video I want to take a look at whether or not these features are any good and whether or not they are useful in this sort of device. So let's head over to the table and take a closer look. So finally, after a little bit more than a year, we have a new update for the TX-6. And this is not what I would have expected at all. I had a few kind of suggestions or wishes for future updates, and I made a video about those, and you can check out the card that will be right here if you want to see that. And none of my predictions came true. Instead, we got a looper, we got a sampler, and we got a few smaller features, like the ability to detune your synth and one where you get to split the signal coming out of the aux port right here. So let's start out by looking at the looping feature. So you exit that by pressing Shift and the selector button. You go down to loop right here, and then you get this menu. If I turn the dial, you'll see the number switches, and that just indicates what track you're recording from. Since I've connected my phone to track 1, we have to select 1. Now this looper is a little hard to use because of a few things. You can't arm it so that it will detect when the sample starts playing, so you have to be very accurate when you start recording it. And the same applies for when you end it. And in order to record, you have to press it and hold it to record, and then when you release, you stop recording. So you can't really use it for instruments that require two hands, unless you want to use your toe to try and record it. So that could be challenging, but let's just record a little loop and see how it goes. So I have this little drum loop here, downloaded from Splice. And now, let's record it. We have to press both at the same time in order to get a clean loop. Then I'm going to try and release it. So you can hear it's not completely clean. So you can adjust the length using the selector button here. Now you'll see that the end marker is blinking. So I'm going to try. And this is actually pretty hard, getting a clean loop. So it's kind of hard using the sampler partly because the screen is so tiny and it's hard to really see the transients. You don't get a lot of information on such a tiny screen. If you have a longer loop, like the longest you can record is 22 seconds. So if you want to trim the end point, you kind of have to wait for a long time to see if you actually got it right. But then, okay, let's look at the other features here. If you want to restart the loop, you simply press the black key. You can also select how much of the sample you want to play. You can turn the dial and do only half, or only a quarter, or only an eighth. Now, once you recorded the loop, you can also select which track you want it on. So now it's on 1, now it's on 2, now it's on 3. You can hear I have a different filter setting on the third track. 4, 5, and 6. So that can be very practical. For example, if you only have one chord and you want to record several loops from the same device. Now, getting a perfect loop is very hard, but that's where the sample feature come in handy. For example, if you get a loop perfectly on the start, like this one is fairly accurate, then you can simply resample it. So you go into the sample menu by going into the menu and then sample, and here you have the sample menu. So it looks similar to the looper, and you can toggle from the speed section to the record section. So if we now want to resample this loop we got going on, we do this by pressing this track button. So let's try and get it on the 1. Okay. So now you can hear we can trigger this loop using the track button. The problem, however, is that while you can loop for 22 seconds, you can only sample for 6 seconds per sample. So it's very limited. One thing that makes the sample feature useful is that you can trigger samples using the sequencer. So if you go into the sequencer here and set the sequencer to the first beat, and then you change from the synth to sample. And now if we start playing, you can hear that the sample is being triggered. Now obviously you can hear that something is wrong. It doesn't loop perfectly. And that's because the tempo is wrong. So I know that the beat is in 81 BPM. So let's adjust this to 81. And then you have a sort of perfect beat almost. And now you also have the option to slow down and speed up. So you can do this both from the track menu when you press shift and the track and you toggle through. You have where on the synth, if you had a synth, you would have this piano right here. But since we have the sample, we have this menu. So that does the same thing as this menu right here. There you can also adjust. So that's one way you can resample a loop into the sequencer. Now, obviously, you can sample other things as well. For example, and then change to the playback menu by pressing the black button. And then you can trigger the sample. And you can hear that there's a little bit of a delay because it didn't start recording perfectly at the same time. So again, you can go, now the little start point is lit up, and then we can adjust. So how can you use this feature? Well, one way would be to, for example, record vocal chops or something like that, and then you have these various tracks that you can then trigger when you're in the sample mode. You can trigger them as you go at the same time as well. And then you can try and sequence this one too, see how that sounds. So there, now I've tried to adjust 95 BPM synth sample to fit with an 81 BPM drum sample. As you can hear, it's not perfect, but it kind of works, I guess. As you can see, it's not the most intuitive workflow, which is why I'm a little curious as to why this was their priority to put into the device, but maybe someone will find it extremely useful. For my part, I have so many other devices that do the same thing, just much better, with the OP1, the OPZ, even a lot of the pocket operators, as well as a ton of other devices. So for a device that's a mixer, primarily a mixer like this, I don't see a huge use scenario for it, but for someone it might be very useful. Okay, so let's look at the tuning feature. Now I have the synth set to play mode, so it's triggered when I press the button here. I just have a simple sine wave playing. So now you can actually micro tune, which hasn't been possible before. So the way you do that is you go into the pitch selector, and then you press the selector button here, and now you can tune the synth by cents. So for example, if you have a synth playing in unison, it might not sound too interesting, because these synths are very bare bones and minimal. So you can hear it sounds very flat. So if you want to create some life, you can detune a little bit and you get some interesting results. And you can hear these vibrations, kind of like it sounds like when you're tuning a guitar. So that's a very small upgrade to a feature that's not really used that much, I don't believe. But it might make the synths a little bit more useful and a little less dry. And now the last feature is simply that now you can split the signal coming out of the aux output right here and have full control over both the left and the right signal. Now I'm not going to show you that, but it might be useful for example, adding effect pedals to the main out signal without getting feedback and stuff like that. Okay, so tell me, do you think this would be useful at all for you, or do you think it's kind of a gimmick? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And also let me know if you want to see more usage areas and if you want to see me play around with this a little bit more and find some more useful areas. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and in the meantime you can check out this video right here where I'm talking about what I would like to see in the TX-6.